talked about how the Aryans, came down, how they basically took over northern India, the Indus Valley, what have you, how they, claimed to create Hinduism and everything like that, about the whole caste system and how that was set up by the Europeans or the Aryans. And we got into all that information. Now, I want to get into, to start this off, basically the reason why they claim to have created Hinduism, and the attachment, the connection that the Aryans have with Hinduism, so to speak. So now this basically really goes back to Akhenaten, believe it or not. So Akhenaten's father was Amenhotep III, but his father-in-law was Tushratta. Now Tushratta was basically the king of the Mitanni tribe in Mesopotamia. So Mitanni in Mesopotamia, it's something that you're going to find a lot when you really start digging into this information. You'll hear about them. Now, the thing is, they don't know exactly what the Mitanni tribe was, what race they were. They believe they were mixed race. A lot of tribes back then was, of course. But the Mitanni tribe was a warrior tribe. And the whole thing with the Mitanni tribe and what they found in Mesopotamia is they found Indian gods. So they found Indra, Mitra, and Varun. So when they found these deities in Mesopotamia, they are, of course, not Mesopotamian gods. So the thing is, they figured, well, the language that these gods was written in Mesopotamia was in an Indo-Aryan language. So they figured that the Indo-Aryans created it or wrote it because, it's dated so long ago. So, of course, this is many reasons why you could find Indian gods in Mesopotamia. It could be, Indians traveling to Kemet who stopped and wrote something down. The information that they're giving us can be completely bogus. There's a lot of different excuses and reasons why they could have found what they found. But when you understand about these gods and their aspects, and again, as I always say, they expect you not to do no research, then you can understand the truth about these gods. So you got to really look at language. And of course, when you start finding stuff language-wise, you can't always, if it's not the first language, you can't always trace it back to those people. You got to make sure, especially if they was travelers, that they didn't pick it up from somewhere else, because it could very well have been written by an Aryan person, by a white person. They could have written it, but they could have picked it up while they was in India. They could have picked it up on their travels from India to Kemet or to wherever. So these are things you got to take into context, and you can't just, this is one of the things they use to give the Aryans claim over Hinduism, but you can't just use stuff like this and just jump all over it and give them claim to a major, faith because of something like this. So now, the date of these writings about these Indian gods goes back to the 14th century BCE. Now, prior to that, we don't find any Aryan writings, of these gods, or really any type of gods. We don't find writings from Aryans about the gods that we know of. So, it's another reason why you can just kill that whole argument. And again, when these Aryans were traveling, it was picking up stories. And again, not all Aryans was in on conquest. Some of them was actually trying to fit in and just, start a family. Now, again, when you're doing your research and you start looking and finding these points or these civilizations or tribes where either the writer is saying we don't know the race, or they tell you straight out we don't know, the race of these people, or they was mixed race, or, Berber and stuff like that, the names they put out there, then this is, especially when it's pertaining to Mesopotamia and in that area, this is where you have the creation of the Persians and Arabs. Plain and simple. This is where you see that those races being created, because what's happening is when you look at the area of the Persians, where the Persians was ruling at, you can see that this is basically the Indus Valley. This is what the Indus Valley was at. So you have, Mesopotamia, you have, of course, Afghanistan, you have Pakistan, you have northern India, and this was basically the Persian territory for a while. We know it encompasses the Indus Valley. So what was happening was these Aryans was coming down and mixing with the northern Indians and creating what we know as Persians and Arabs. Now, just like the Chinese, who don't want to be compared with the Japanese or the Koreans or what have you. Persians don't like to be compared with Arabs and vice versa. But I mean, just like we could say with the Asians, come on, look at them. Y'all all look Asian. That's why we say Asian. Y'all look alike. It's the same thing with the Persians and Arabs. It's really hard to tell them apart unless you are Arab looking at an Arab or Arab looking at a Persian or a Persian looking at an Arab. They kind of sort of know the difference. But for the most part, this is where it was created. You had different civilizations mixing them with Africans, mixing them with the Indians, the Aryans coming down, and it was just mixing and creating tribes. And this is why you find a lot, and they don't always like to point this out, of course. This is where you find a lot of these tribes that they can't describe what race they was. When they talk about the Hittites, who was the Hittites? There was a mixed race. Some people would just flat out say, well, they was black, mostly black. But then others would say like the Hyksos and the Hittites probably was a mixed race or predominantly black or something like that. This is where you have the creation of the Persians and the Arabs and them beginning their conquest. And eventually, the Persians did create, a vast empire that ruled, for a long time. Of course, the Persians defeated the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, when they came into Kemet. So this is where all that stuff started. So when you start seeing that, you start to understand that this is all a part of the Aryans coming down, conquering in northern India, and basically just spreading out and really creating this agenda to take over. Now, you got to think about it. Even still, when you come down in a mixed race, and then it keep happening, and you have all these people, and then you have these tribes start forming. Of course, they still gonna kind of feel like outcasts, like they need to start, their own civilization as being mixed people, because before then, of course, Africans and then the Asians took over most of the lands, and we already set up civilizations. And all was left really was the hottest places nobody wanted to be, which you could say Mesopotamia, the Middle East or what have you. So that's what they had left to basically take. And of course, the Aryans didn't want to stay up in the cold too much longer. They wanted to come down and basically take from the civilizations they had already established so much. So the Aryans was coming down and mixing with the civilizations. Remember, I talked about the Mani in my video on YouTube about the origins of all the races. And you can see the Mani, which is the indigenous people of Thailand. Remember, they had afros. Yeah, well, they still have afros. These people still exist to this day. When you look at these indigenous people, it's the same thing when you go to like Cambodia, you go to China and Japan, you have dark-skinned Asians still exist to this day, especially in Japan, especially in Thailand with the Mani, and they having afros. You can see it clear as day. You can see a lot of them look like black people, but we can see, what happened when you look at the Thai people today and the Chinese and Japanese today. They have straight, long hair because of the Aryans coming down and mixing in. Now, to me, when I researched this thing and looking at this whole thing, to me, this was a coordinated attack on melanin, which basically leads me to believe that at the top, back then, they understood their deficiency. They understood their problem with melanin, and they basically wanted to weaken the rest of the world. They wanted to basically infect the rest of the world and decrease their melanin. And I'm going to explain later why this is important. And I'm going to explain later why them mixing in, basically it's a good thing and a bad thing. But that's basically what they came to do. They came in, they weakened the people genetically weakened them and made them, less melanin, which melanin is a major thing. So when you understand that, think about that. From the woolly hair, the blackness, the representation of power, melanin, into the straight hair. So that's basically what took place. To me, it was something that they had to understand and know. Now, they did this because they wanted to basically get in power, and once they got in power, we seen the disappearance of the black gods from the ancient world. Remember, they gone. They got rid of them, and we seen the rise of these white gods, these unseen gods. And, when you look at Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and Vishnu, when you look at Jehovah, Yahweh, Yahweh, all that, these are all gods that's here to basically cover up the black gods, to hide the black gods, to reduce them to a level of secrecy that you can only discover their true origins and identity in secret societies. And it's basically what took place. It's basically what happened. You had all these governments basically get in on this because they themselves are in these secret societies and want to rise up in ranks. So they had to do their part. And again, you have to understand that one ruler at the top, he only think about himself. There is no way you can have one man representing an entire kingdom and not have a set of rules that's basically going to really govern him and limit his power as far as the effect he can have on the entire kingdom. You can't get that power to one person. But when you look at a president and people that had this power to do so much, I know we got a Senate and what have you, but the president has executive orders, so he can basically do what he wants. So these people, these rulers have basically sold their people out, and that's going to make a lot of sense later. They sold them out. So you had these people, the Aryans come down, mix in, weaken the nations, and basically leave, because the more melanin they had, the more stronger, the more tough they would be to conquer and fight. And they understood this. Somebody at the top understood this. I'm telling you, when you do the research, you're going to understand that. So they basically wanted to weaken them. They want them to not understand that this is about melanin, that this goes back to the black gods and what the black gods is really about, which we're going to get into in this video as well. They didn't want the people to understand that, so they took it away. They took it away because it leads to the understanding of melanin and the understanding of Kundalini energy and what all that stuff is about. Now, when you go and you look at, China, Thailand, all these Asian countries, they represent the dragon. They celebrate the snake, the serpent, and the dragon. You see it all throughout Asia, celebrated. They have the year of the dragon, in China. I mean, it's just a big celebration. So a lot of these people celebrate, and they celebrate, the dragon, they celebrate the serpent. And a lot of them don't really understand what this stuff's about. And a lot of them have no clue that it goes back to melanin and black gods. Now, I was talking about this at the end of the Moorish DVD about melanin and why it's important. I'm going to get into it a lot more deeper at the end of this DVD. So if you are European, if you're a white person, trust me, you want to pay attention to that. You want to listen and understand what this stuff is really about, because it really pertains to you in so many different ways. So now, getting back to this part, understand, of course, they sold out. They sold the people out, these rulers, in these Asian countries, India as well. And they sold them out because they understand that these religions go back to the understanding of melanin and real true spirituality. So, you can trace this stuff and you can do all the research. But of course, it obviously comes from Kemet. And anybody who is a real scholar, if you really do research like me, and like a lot of people, if you really research, it's no way they can hide this stuff from you. This is why we have entertainment and so many things to basically bombard our time and keep us from really digging deep, because I'm telling you, it takes a lot of time to really get this kind of knowledge and get to the heart of this stuff. I know I just spit it out in videos like, it's all in one book, but I'm telling you, it takes a lot of research and trial and error and really digging and doing research to really get to these points. And they know you don't have time for that. So, they think you're stupid. But anybody who has learned or who really does research can easily look at these gods. And when you start reading about them and understanding what they represent and their stories, you can clearly trace them back to Kemet. So, of course, if everybody in these countries understood that, wait a minute, these religions go back to Kemet, they will look more deeply into Kemet. They will look more deeply into the Egyptian mystery school and the Egyptian teachings, and will understand, about melanin, about true spirituality, about what this stuff is all about. And that's not what they want, of course. So when you go and dig into this stuff, I was talking about before how they went into Mesopotamia. This is 14th century BCE, they found these artifacts, they found these writings pertaining to Indian gods, and the writings is dating back to 14th century BCE. So one of the gods they found was Indra, which is an Indian god. Now this is Indra, let me read this. It says, Indra, in Hindu mythology, the king of the gods. Remember that, the king of the gods. He is one of the main gods of the Rig Veda, which is basically a Vedic Sanskrit writings, and it is the Indo-European cousin of the German Wotan, Norse Odin, Greek Zeus, and Roman Jupiter. Now understand that Indo-European, how they try to blend it in with these white gods. So you have Indra, the king of the gods. Osiris is king of the gods. You have Osiris's mother, who is Tefnut. She is queen of the gods. You have Indra's mother, who is a deity, who is also queen of the gods. You have Indra being the brother of Agni. Agni means fire. You have Osiris being the brother of Isis. Isis is the goddess of elements, one of them being fire. She is a solar deity. You have Indra being the defender of Dharma, which is basically the cosmic law and order. You have Osiris being defender of Ma'at, which is cosmic law and order. You have reference to Indra being the bull. You have the Vedic hymn to Indra, the bull. And we have Osiris Apis. We have Asar Happy, which is where we get Apis. And Apis is where we get, Asar Apis, where we get Serapis. And we know that Asar goes to the bull, it's represented as a bull in a lot of depictions. So you have Indra being represented by a bull. You have Asar or Osiris being represented by a bull. You have Indra, who has 14 lifespans. You have Osiris, who was chopped up in 14 pieces. I can go on and on and on. So many comparisons that you can do between Indra and Osiris. You also have Rudra and Yama, who are kings of the netherworld, just like Osiris. You have Seti, who was basically chopped up like Osiris, except, Seti was chopped up in 54 pieces. So we can go through a lot of the Hindu gods and compare them to Osiris, and it's for a reason that it's Osiris, which we'll get into. But you can compare so many of the stories, Krishna, Vishnu, which we'll talk about later. A lot of these gods you can look at and see how they compare with Egyptian gods, and that the two go hand in hand in a lot of different ways. It is no way around it. It's almost laughable to scholarship to me. When you look at it, it's like, what do they expect? This is why I say to people, I always use this phrase, only people in third world countries will believe that, because they must don't have access to the right kind of information. Anybody who does this stuff, who was into this stuff, long ago, they probably thought they can get away with it, and they kind of trying to make up for it now with the distractions with entertainment. But when you just starting to really get into this information and read about it, it's really easy. It's plain to see. But they leave this stuff for the people in secret societies, because they will ultimately come to the true understanding of what it all means, which you're going to understand at the end of this video. So they leave this information for them. It's not for us, as I keep saying. The Bible is not for you to understand the true hidden meaning of it, which we're going to get into that a little bit too. It's not meant for you. It's meant for them in the secret society. This is why it is at the altar of every Masonic lodge throughout the world, the Bible, the Torah, the Quran. Why is there nothing about Buddhism, Hinduism? We're going to get into that as well. It'll make a lot of sense. You got to understand what this stuff represents and how it goes back to the solar god, the sun. It goes back to melanin and Kundalini rising. And this is very important in understanding this stuff, because it's everything. And I talked about in part 1 about the was staff and the jet pillar of Osiris, the serpent, and how that, corresponds with the Shiva Linga, what that whole thing was about. So it's another thing that we can compare with Hinduism and see its relation to the Egyptian teachings. Now, when we look at Brahma is associated with Harani Agrabah. And Harani Agrabah is the cosmic egg, or the golden womb. Now, where else do we find a cosmic egg? We find it with Ptah. We find a cosmic egg, or the Agdod, which we got into previous video. Now, they just basically gave it away right there with the cosmic egg. I could have just started off with the cosmic egg and just left it at there. Cosmic egg, and we got a cosmic egg in Kemet with Ptah. Same stuff is talking about. So again, this stuff just goes back. When you know this stuff, I know I've been spitting it out and giving it to you in videos, so it's just easy information you got. But you got to understand how fortunate you are to have the mindset to want to seek after this information. To millions and billions of people, this is mush. This is stuff they have absolutely no clue about. But you guys understand it when you know about the Agdod. So when you see this in Hinduism, wait a minute, they got a cosmic egg too. That's the same thing in Kemet. It's easy for you to put together when you get into this stuff. So, that's basically, we can understand it's coming from Kemet, and then we get Hinduism, and it's many reasons why that happened. Of course, they was going back and forth. So now with Buddhism, let's get into Buddhism, because what Buddhism basically did, Buddhism basically took the physical and spiritual aspect of it all, the truth of it all, and basically give it to you in a better understanding, a more simple understanding. Understanding, Buddhism and everything it's talking about is just, when you just break it down, it's just so simple to where you can really just understand where Buddha is coming from, where Siddhartha is coming from. So we know the story real fast. Siddhartha basically, born and, a prince, and basically wanted to get out the palace, and finally got let out. And he was basically going around to basically see what the people was like. And he saw, the four sightings. The four sightings, which was, old man, he saw death, he saw disease, and he saw the old man basically singing and having fun. Those four sightings led to the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths is, there is suffering. Plain and simple. Suffering is caused by desire. Third one is that desire or suffering doesn't have to be. If you denounce desire, you can get rid of suffering. And a fourth one is basically, there is a way to get rid of desire by following the eightfold path, or the eight path. And the eightfold path is basically, it has to deal with meditation. Now, following the eightfold path, that's basically dealing with thought, understanding, speech, action, livelihood, efforts, concentration, and mindfulness. So dealing with these 8 things, this is the eightfold path. And you follow the eightfold path, which basically leads you into karma. It's dealing with karma. Now, following the eightfold path will determine whether or not you have karmic consequences. And having karmic consequences is not a good thing. If you can go through life with no karmic consequences, this is what they call the last birth, or the last life, where you basically reach nirvana. And it's basically 2 states of nirvana, one in life and one in death. And nirvana basically mean, getting rid of desire. It means to extinguish. And every Buddhist strives to reach nirvana. Now, if you don't reach nirvana, you die, basically still in desire, and still with these kind of, what they call sins as far as Buddhism, you basically reincarnate. That's basically what happens to you. Now, we talked about reincarnation before, and, a lot of people don't believe in it, but you got to understand, if you really pay attention to Buddhism, if we really get into this stuff, this is why this stuff is far out in Tibet and far out in these countries where, a lot of people just don't really care what goes on there. They basically prove reincarnation. I mean, to me, they proved it. Now, with reincarnation, basically what they did as far as proving it is, when a person dies, when they die and then they come back, they have a system of finding them, of finding out if they are the person that died. So if you really read a lot of books on Buddhism and understand in Tibet about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, they have a Buddhist Book of the Dead, just like, the Egyptians have the Egyptian Book of the Dead that I did the video on. It's the same thing. And this book is basically to guide you through reincarnation, or guide you through death until reincarnation. So in Buddhism, they believe after you die, if you do reincarnate, you will reincarnate after 45 days and you'll come back. So that kind of gives them this time limit, so they can understand if somebody was pregnant, 45 days after that person's death, and they have a system where they can find out if you reincarnated. And they can do that by being in these little small towns that they in. You go into Tibet, it's like small villages. It's not so many people. So everybody knows everything. Everybody knows each other's business. It's nothing like the cities we grew up in. So, of course, they know when a person just had a baby and where the timeline adds up at. And then sometimes the baby or the child, when it's a little bit older, they'll find out that they have a birthmark, the same birthmark in the same spot as the person that died, or I would have traits of somebody who died. And since everybody know each other, the person will pick up on it like, hey, you remind me of such and such. In a lot of cases, like these kids, they be talking about people they shouldn't know exist, that came from a past life and things like that. So once they have a person, they have a child that they believe reincarnated, they put them through a test. So the test, once they realize who they think the person is, they'll take that person's effects, the stuff that they had when they was alive, and they'll put it with a bunch of other stuff. And I'm telling you, the kid will walk in a room and go straight to the item and pick it up. Tell them choose one, pick it up. So then, okay, it could be a coincidence, so they'll tell them to choose another. And in these cases, a lot of times, the child will choose every single item as the person that they thought they reincarnated as. So that person affects all his items that he had. When he came back and reincarnated as this child, the child would go and pick out all the items out of a bunch of items, pick them all out. And then they would know that, hey, yeah, it is him. You reincarnated, you made it, and then, through reincarnation, once they find out and confirm that this was a person that once was here, it's a big celebration. And it's a celebration because the person actually made it through reincarnation. And I know the whole thing really is about, not reincarnating to basically ascend, but you got to understand to make it back here in the physical form as a human is still a big thing. Just like the ancient Egyptians, the people of the Buddhists and in Tibet, they believe in people reincarnating as insects or animals. This is why, they have a lot of respect for animals and everything because, they believe that if it's not food, if you're not killing it for food, you shouldn't kill animals. You should basically treat animals the way you treat, other people. Now, also with reincarnation, a person could reincarnate, across the country. You could have relatives in other countries that you don't understand. How we do DNA tests and you realize you got people that you descend from another country. So you can also reincarnate across countries, across, cities and towns, not just within the same town. And we see that a lot where people reincarnate across country. And of course, you can't find people that way. It's harder. So understanding the 4 sightings, the 4 noble truths, and the 8-fold path, all this stuff is the same as the path to Osiris. That's basically what this is. When you look at Ani's Book of the Dead, you can see basically it's the same type of concept. So in Buddhism, when it's talking about suffering being caused by desire and to rid yourself of desire, in ancient Egypt, they say, rise above your animal instinct, because that's basically what desire is. Desire is lower brain. So desire, being lower brain, is something you need to have access and control of the lower brain to basically avoid, falling victim to. So in Buddhism, rising above desire and ridding yourself of desire is the same as, rising above your animal nature. So this basically just goes right into Osiris and the jet pillar, the jet column, your spine, or what have you, and basically grasping the serpentine energy and understanding how that energy basically gives you control of the lower brain and the third eye. So with that, you can continue, you can ascend. So now when you look at the whole 8-fold path and how that can basically lead you to having no karmic consequences, and you need to have no karmic consequences in order to go further to reach nirvana, it's basically the same as Ani in the Book of the Dead when he basically, goes and gives the 42 negative confessions. So no negative confessions, 42 negative confessions. He's saying basically I have not done any of that, just like I have no karmic consequences. And when they're talking about having no karmic consequences leads to the last death or the last birth or the last life or what have you. And that's basically the same thing. It's the same thing. When you basically pass through judgment, you get to Osiris, and Osiris basically gets you to, the realm of the gods. And that's basically what it's saying in Buddhism. If you have no karmic consequences, you can basically reach nirvana and ascend and keep going. So it's the same thing in essence when you look at it. It's talking about the same stuff. So you got to really look at these things and compare it. And Buddhism, what it does is it basically just breaks it down. It kind of makes it a little bit more simple, but still a lot of people don't really understand what it's pertaining to. Because when you reading it and you're looking at Buddhism, if you don't understand that this stuff is talking about energy, it's talking about the soul, it's talking about so many things that pertains to your body, again, in ancient Kemet, when you look at the jet pillar and you look at the third eye and the pineal gland and what all this stuff is talking about, we're really talking about the human body. And it's, just covered with so many stories and mysteries and things like that, to where it almost seems unreal to people. That's why a lot of people can't grasp the concept, because, you have these stories. And when people hear these stories, they just think about it being a fable or a story. what have you, a fairy tale. So they can't really put it together. They can't really take it seriously because it don't seem real. But the simple fact that you have all this stuff hidden behind it, all this secret information, tells you it's something that you should know.